What's up, everybody? Welcome to Untitled Conversations. This is the podcast where we talk about everything faith, life, and the world as we know it while growing with God. I'm your host, Joy, and let's get into the first episode. So, this episode, I'm going to introduce myself to you guys. Definitely, I want you guys to go comment and let me know a little fact about you. Want to have some interaction with y'all. Then we're going to get into what is Untitled Conversations, because it's like, why did I pick that name, right? Then we're going to do a little Q&A. You guys submitted some questions on Instagram, so I'm going to answer those questions and go from there. So I am Joy Shipman. Right now, I'm a junior college student at Winston-Salem State University. I chose Winston just because of the family atmosphere, really. I grew up in, a two-parent household. My dad is a pastor. My mom worked in the school system. So really, that's why I wanted to start this podcast, to kind of share my story and the relationship between me walking with Christ and, life as we know it. So I started my walk with Christ at a young age, obviously, because I'm a PK. PKs always get that bad rep. I'm not your average PK, right? I was what you want to call it? I wasn't the stereotypical PK that, acted out, all that fun stuff like that. I was just regular little old me. So this podcast came to me as an idea of basically connecting to other people that were like me, that necessarily didn't really know how to have that walk with Christ, because everybody that grew up in church, we don't really know God for real, or we think we know because of what is told to us. But when you start to venture and know God for yourself, it kind of changes. So that kind of leads me to the title. I was titled a PK, the goody two shoes, all my life. So I was like, let me start a podcast, and it's called Untitled Conversations, because I feel like a lot of times in this generation, when you put titles on something, it kind of boxes you in. So it's like, you put a title on me saying I'm a PK, you're boxing me into what you think a PK should be, and not necessarily open to seeing who I am, right? So I feel like also in this generation, we're so quick to slap titles on things, but titles, if you think about it, they limit the conversation, right? So when you slap a title on a relationship, oh, I want to be your boyfriend, your girlfriend, a lot of times we see that those relationships will change because of a title. Whereas if you're my best friend and I like you and you like me, why can't we just be best friends? What you need a title for? Because as soon as you slap a title on something, then it kind of changes. People are like, oh, I taught him my boyfriend and he started to change. The trajectory of the relationship changed. So in a sense, when you slap a title on something, it kind of minimizes what that conversation can be about, right? So, when you slap a title on a conversation, it's like, okay, now you can only talk about what that title is, right? So a lot of the episodes will have concepts, but the whole concept of the podcast is to have those untitled conversations. Bringing it back to the faith side, the Bible is just a bunch of untitled conversations and untitled stories, right? There's no set, this is how it has to be and this is what it has to be about, just because it's stories. There's not really a, they say, the creation, that's a story, but it's not necessarily a title on, people have titles, but conversations don't necessarily always need titles. So that was really where Untitled Conversations came from. Not gonna lie, I was driving down the road, and that's where the title came from. So although the podcast itself has a title, quote unquote, this podcast is going to be a bunch of untitled conversations with me, some of my friends, some you may have seen before, some you may not have seen before. But that's kind of where the idea sparked for the podcast. So that's about the faith aspect. When it comes to life, I'm a college student. I go to a HBCU. So a lot of those ties with being in college and walking with Christ, they kind of come into question, or not even come into question. It's hard to balance, or it seems like it's hard to balance when it's like, well, I want to walk with Christ, but it's fun in the world, right? Or I want to walk with Christ, but I don't know where to start. Or I want to walk with Christ and I don't know how to do this, that, and the other. There's no perfect plan to walking with Christ and existing in the world as we know it today, right? So that's where the world as we know it. Culture has an impact on us that we don't even know. So this is kind of dissecting, what it's like to still be in the culture, but in the church, if that makes sense. So now we're going to get to a Q&A. Some people submitted some questions on Instagram, so I'm going to give y'all the answers, right? So the first question I got was, what was it like growing up as a pastor's kid? Not going to lie to you, it comes with its pros and its cons. The con being I was in church every day of the week almost. You got Bible study on Tuesday, choir rehearsal on Thursday, and then you got church service on Sunday. Now I was fortunate. We only had one service. The PKs that sat through 2, 3, 4, 5 services. Shout out to y'all because y'all better than me. Not gonna lie to you. But life as a PK, I could say it's interesting. My dad is a well-known pastor in Charlotte. I'm from Charlotte. I didn't tell y'all that. I'm from Charlotte. So my dad is a well-known pastor in Charlotte, which came with like the PK stuff. People always giving food. That's one pro to being a PK. It come with food because the people in the church can cook. So we was always fed. I'm not going to lie. The food, bussin'. Church food always hit. The fish fries that be happening after church. Jesus had a fish fry with the disciples, if y'all didn't know that. But, so, the food was good. But I will also say I came from, both my parents my mom was the only child. No, my dad was the only child. My mom's brother passed away early. So really, I didn't have a very large, bloodline family, but my church family became my immediate family. So that was definitely something that I grew up in. I grew up in the church. I'm telling you. Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays, we was in the church. But I would say the con is kind of like the pressure that came with it, right? Because the pressure to, in a sense, hold up the family name, right? In a sense that, I don't want to get, quote, caught doing something that's going to tarnish my dad's name because of his reputation. But at the same time, it's like, I got my own reputation. I got to hold up my own reputation. So like I said, it came with its pros and its cons. I will say that I wouldn't be the person I am today if it wasn't for my dad being a PK, or if it wasn't for my dad being a pastor and me being a PK. It was also I didn't have to bear the load by myself. I have an older brother and sister that are twins, so they kind of had to experience it first. So they were able to, give me the, quote, do's and don'ts. But being that we are 7 years apart, my brother always jokes around and called me the only child because I was the youngest and we were so far apart, whatever. Shout out to my brother. But it's more so they kind of got to experience it for 7 years before I got there. But we did transition churches after I came into the picture. So that's kind of a broad scope of what it was like being a PK. Now that I've gotten older and started to really experience Christ for myself, I'm appreciative of the example that I have in my father, being that he is a pastor. So it's I have that one-on-one conversation with him, and I can always go to him with hey, do you have the answer to this? Not saying he has all the answers, but it's more so, when I was trying to figure out where do I start, I had him right there to go ask that question where some others don't. So at the end of the day as well, I'm here if y'all have questions. I don't have all the answers to your questions, but I can be, that helping hand when you need it. So like I said, if you ever have questions along this journey, because y'all are coming on this journey with me, if y'all ever have questions, drop them in the comments, let me know, and I'll try to answer them. So the second question is, what is a life lesson you wish you learned sooner? That's a heavy hitter, I'm not going to lie to you. But one thing I can say that recently took place was when I was starting the podcast, or when I had the idea to start the podcast. I got the idea back in January 2022, and I thought about it. I was like, dang, maybe I should start a podcast. Not gonna lie, the initial idea to start the podcast came, and the podcast I was planning on starting was probably gonna be trash. But I really had to trust the process and trust God with the idea of the podcast, because I think a lot of times we get an idea to start something and we want to start it, as soon as we get the idea, but that's not necessarily always the intention behind whatever that message is, whatever the idea is. So I think a life lesson I wish I learned sooner was to, in a sense, take time, evaluate, and kind of slow down when it comes to ideas and starting ideas. You don't necessarily always have to start, the moment that you get an idea. Now, sometimes you do, but that's kind of something that you have to ponder on with yourself. I'm glad that I didn't start this podcast any earlier than I am right now, because y'all probably wouldn't be listening, not gonna lie to you. But really just the overall scope of slowing down, not rushing, because we always as kids be like, dang, I can't wait to be an adult. dang, I wish I wouldn't have said that, because as we get closer to being an adult, I'm only 21, but I wish I could go back to being 12, because life was a lot easier when we was 12. You remember when we was running around elementary school playing games and we was like, dang, your parents told you something you ain't like. I can't wait to be an adult. I take that back. Lord, I take that back. But it's too late for that right now. So that's that. And then the last question is, why did I decide to start the podcast? The main reason I decided to start this podcast was to, like I said earlier, connect with people that are like me, or more people that think like me. I think that, like I said, there are a lot of people right now in the world that are trying to figure out this thing called life, being in school as a college student, or just life in general, trying to figure life out, but also trying to walk with Christ and build that relationship. So this is a podcast where we're just going to have open and honest conversations about life in the world, life in this world that we're living in, while trying to also walk with Christ. And those are all the questions. So as we wrap up this episode, give you guys a little sneak peek at what's to come this season. You can expect a lot of great conversations from different people, different perspectives, different walks of life as a whole, while all having the same common ground of developing our relationship with Christ. So make sure y'all like, comment, and subscribe below, and follow us on IG and TikTok at untitledconvos.podcast. That is untitledconvos.podcast. And follow us on Twitter at untitledconvos. I'll see y'all next week.